Welcome to today's episode of Optimizing Live. We're going to be talking today about how do we escape the AI Pilot Purgatory and what does real ROI look like? I'm Richard Dolman, and as always, joined with my favorite colleague, Randy. How you doing today, Randy?
Doing well. Thinking about side dishes for Thanksgiving. We should maybe make a little special segment at the end of the show. Get people to stick around to the end.
We'll get some good prompts set up for what are some good side dishes and other things for the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. So great. So as I mentioned, the topic that we teed up for this is escaping AI Pilot Purgatory. And part of the reason we're talking about this today is, I've been reading several reports lately. There's an MIT State of AI report out. There's a McKinsey report and a few others. And one of the themes that I'm picking up from what I've been reading lately is that, a vast majority, anywhere between 60 to 80% of companies surveyed across these various reports are saying they're experimenting with AI. So they're doing a lot of things with AI, but what's really standing out is the very low percentage that has indicated they're seeing any real return on investment, that they're able to see measurable value coming out of this. And this is something we've been talking about as an ongoing thread around AI adoption in general and how to accelerate it. But I find it really interesting that, a lot of organizations have jumped on the bandwagon, but there may not be a clear strategy or other infrastructure in place so they can really get that measurable value. And I think that's just an interesting pattern that we're seeing out there, and we're going to explore that today.
Yeah, the thing that always triggers me when we talk about ROI is, and I'm going to go back to my classic question that's in every conversation, is what are we optimizing for? And often, if it's an ROI conversation, we're looking for some direct impact on EBITDA, right? Are we able to create more revenue? Are we able to save costs? How does this impact that bottom line? And the question I want to ask instead is, what is the actual value of building a strategic organizational capability? So that's the conversation I want to have, because I know for those of you who don't know Richard and I, we've spent the last at least dozen years, probably longer, just helping organizations figure out how do we improve performance as an organization. And any number of core pieces to that equation come down to, what are some strategic capabilities that you have gaps in your existing system? And we want to help organizations understand, where do we have strategic capability gaps, and then how do we close those gaps? And so I would turn the ROI conversation back around on, what is the ROI in closing a strategic capability gap? And what's the ongoing payback and the ongoing impact of building a strategic capability? So when it comes to AI, how are we looking at that? That's really the conversation I want to explore, because it all depends on what are you measuring? How are these investment decisions making it, across that investment threshold? So that's the thing I hope to explore today.
Yeah, the definition of return on investment is kind of nebulous, right? Of how organizations, how leaders define that varies across organizations that certainly that I've worked with over the years. I think this phenomenon of generative AI and the pace at which it's evolving and taking hold of organizations has created an interesting dynamic in that I don't even know in some organizations if that question is being asked, is what is this investment costing us, right? There's certainly the human capital that goes into it. You and I spent a lot of time, Randy, learning and experimenting and using generative AI tools, and working with others who are building AI capabilities in various tools. And so that there's that human capital time invested. There's certainly dollars that are being invested depending on investments that are going into infrastructure, cleansing data, getting that ready, training for people to upskill, et cetera. And so I'm curious if there's rigor and focus being put into organizations of this is what we're investing, and do they even have a clue what they are investing into generative AI? And then to extend that question of, all right, what is the return we're getting off of that? My hope is that of the organizations that are investing in something that's generative AI, that they at least have a sense of how they've incorporated this into their existing or typical metrics, whether they're using KPIs, whether they're using, other ways, OKRs, et cetera. And so my concern is that a lot of organizations, and we've seen this in the past with other types of transformations or change initiatives, my concern is that organizations are going to be investing a lot. They're not going to have a real handle on what that investment really looks like, which makes it very difficult to point to something tangible and measurable. And that's when I think we're going to have a lot of issues in organizations to be able to do this. And the other thing that I've been learning is there's a big gap between let's say the Fortune 100, the Fortune, even maybe the Fortune 500 organizations and what they're able to invest versus the mid-market and smaller businesses. I think smaller organizations are definitely at risk of being left behind here because they either don't have the resources or the capability or just the bandwidth to be able to really lean into this in an intelligent and thoughtful way.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting framing, because certainly with a little bit of investment, the smaller organizations have a massive advantage at being able to learn and close gaps more rapidly. Kind of going back to the whole EBITDA impact versus strategic capability building dynamic, in my experience, the larger the organization, all too frequently what I've seen is more and more of a disconnect from investing in improving in the system and more of a focus on, here's the list of things that we want you to deliver. Mm-hmm. And so for middle managers on up to executives, it's really more about how is their performance being judged. And with you and I playing in the strategic improvement space for 12 plus years, right? It's pretty close to 100% of the time that, what I've seen, and I'll go back to, one fateful conversation that I still remember it. This has been probably 6 years ago now, maybe. I still remember this conversation as though it was yesterday. I had a director level individual who was part of the strategic improvement team. And in one critical conversation, we were talking about all the different ways that we were focused on improving how their system worked, which improves things like adaptability, improves cycle time, improves decision quality, improves flow of value through the organization. And this individual said, look, I understand all that, and I do believe it's important, but at the end of the year, I know that the conversation I'm going to have with my boss about how I performed and how my organization performed is going to come down to whether or not we delivered these 27 projects. And that's a pattern that I have seen different flavors of that, where it's, are you delivering the projects as the focus versus are you improving your system? And to me, not holding leaders accountable for improving the system that they're working in is probably one of the, one of the most surefire ways to maybe optimize for short-term ROI, but greatly, reduce the ongoing effectiveness on a longer-term scale. And you're making those future short-term ROI focuses harder and harder to achieve by ignoring how do you improve your system, and how do you improve it by building ongoing, that ongoing payback of a strategic capability.
Yeah. So, I've seen this many play out in different forms over the years in larger organizations. I think you're right. There's, whether you're talking about kind of mid-level, director level managers or even higher level leaders, right? They may have formed that pattern of, I have this punch list of things that I have to accomplish. My incentive plan is built into this. And here comes this new, ambiguous, complex, rapidly changing phenomenon. And we're not able to adapt our mindset to that. We're not able to kind of adapt that approach. And again, a lot of leaders that I've seen, and we're all humans, so we all fall into this trap from time to time. Try not to stay in that trap for too long. Is that we start quote locally optimizing. I'm trying to optimize for my part of the hierarchy, for my for my incentive plan. If I'm a good people first leader, I'm trying to optimize for my people so that they're thriving and doing well. I may not be zooming out and optimizing for the whole.
Yep.
And the bigger the organization is, the more complexity and the bigger the challenge. If we juxtapose that against, again, going to a smaller organization, mid-sized company, the dynamic there is likely just bandwidth. People in smaller organizations, it's very common to be wearing multiple hats. So we're oversubscribed. We're just trying to keep the boat afloat. We're just trying to keep our head above water. And it may start as a bandwidth issue, or we don't have that internal capability. So we just are going to put our heads down and pound rocks. And so that's an interesting challenge, depending on whether you're looking at a large, more complex organization that has certainly a lot of organizational inertia working against you to really try something new, to innovate, to bring about change. Again, considering the rapid pace of Gen AI, and then the mid-sized, smaller companies are just probably at a loss for just not even knowing where to start, because again, they don't have that internal capability, they don't have the bandwidth. So regardless of what's kind of holding you back, I mean, what are some thoughts that you've got, Randy, for how to kind of break through that stagnation or break through that organizational inertia, so that we can at least start seeing a clearer path to some sort of value with Gen AI?
Yeah. And I think you just said two of the keywords in that tee up, and they're very important. You said ROI and you said value. And often there's a disconnect, right? Like there are elements of value that don't always show up in how ROI is viewed. And so to me, that would be the first conversation: is how are we making prioritization decisions? How are we viewing and maybe aligning and right sizing our definition of value as an organization with how we're evaluating our investment opportunities? And like this could, likely include working with finance and, maybe up to the CFO level to say, hey, like, how does our governance actually work? How do we make investment decisions? And do we have the right balance of strategic capability growth? And do we have the right balance of, when we look at our strategic goals for the year, right? Like you said, whether it's KPIs or OKRs, do we have the right balance of the things we're delivering with the performance of our system in delivering those things? And if we have kind of a balanced scorecard of, like deliver value for sure, deliver the most valuable things, but also some level of instrumentation of how is our system performing at delivering that value, and making sure that when when it comes to what most companies are still doing is there still is typically some level of annual planning, and hopefully there's some ongoing adaptation to that, and that it's not a one and done, and like we don't look at it and unlock those priorities for another 12 months. But even in that big like first pass of like, what do we think the next year is going to look like, do we have those capability building factors so that we can look at our investments and it's not just a bunch of things we're delivering, it's also how are we improving our system.
Yeah And I'm going to go back to the old cliche that I've used throughout my consulting and coaching career for the last several years is, the old adage of culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I do believe that depending on the nature of your organization, right? Whether you're looking at AI adoption, Gen AI specifically as part of your core offering, if you're a tech company, let's say, versus maybe you're a more traditional, brick and mortar organization, banking, financial services, insurance, manufacturing, et cetera, you're going to be looking at this a little bit differently. And I still think that for most organizations, for many organizations at least, it's more of a cultural, strategic barrier than a technical barrier. For example, Zapier, who's built their business on connecting systems, APIs, those sorts of things. They made a specific commitment that they were going to go all in with AI, and I think they set a target of essentially being virtually 100% AI focused. Now they're a tech company. They've got, I'm sure, very smart people inside the organization. But there's a cultural component of when you mandate that this is what we're doing, this is the direction we're going, we're all in on AI. If your culture is right and your strategic focus is already well aligned, that's something that you might be able to do. You might be able to pull that off. And by the report I've read, it looks like they're pulling that off fairly well. But if you're not already inherently a tech company that has that internal technical capability, I'm seeing a lot of organizations, again, just they're dabbling. They're doing some form of piloting. They say, yes, there's some AI work going on over there in the corner, but it's not built into their overall strategic plan. It's not being viewed as an organizational imperative. It's just something that's happening over there. And I think we can look at the nature of the organization, understand what is our core competency, and then make sure that we're aligning our core competencies to start to achieve that. And this is something that I'm seeing a lot of organizations, again, just getting wrapped around the axle, either trying to overthink it or underthink it, and just that this is something for IT to worry about, or this is, this team of engineers over there are doing some experimentation. And again, I'm concerned about the mid-market and smaller companies as well, because they're probably going to be looking at this as something that is a risk to their organization. But if they don't have that internal capability, then how do they outsource that, and how do they find good partners to outsource to that can help them build those capabilities and stay within those boundaries of understanding what they're investing.
Yeah, love it. So the thing that comes to mind for me is we see it all too often. It's the middle management layer where things either start to break down, or often where real change can start to take root. So I've been kind of reflecting on what would we want middle managers to do in service of helping move the needle on the shift from full on, EBITDA impact, hardcore P&L savings versus that strategic capability building. And I think the way things likely show up for the middle management layer is something along these lines, right? Are they focused on solving a specific problem, showing a hard cost savings? Hard cost savings are pretty challenging if you're looking at it through the lens of time. If it's a time savings and it needs to be a hard cost savings, then guess what? Somebody's leaving your team. If you really want to show a hard cost savings, you got to get employee cost out of that equation. So is that the only way that you can win? All too often, soft cost savings, or like we can now shift our time to more strategic, activities and higher value activities. That rarely wins in an environment and a culture that is going to be focused on the hard P&L impact savings. So that's problematic, because you're probably asking a middle manager to put themselves in a situation where, like, maybe it's a short-term win for them politically, but ultimately they're probably, they're in a position where they've been building a team and building some kind of capability, and now if you have to let people go into, I'm going to assume that they go into some other area of the business, right? Like, it's like, my team doesn't need them, they can go find another position somewhere else. That's the scenario that I prefer. But the question I guess I would prompt those middle managers with is, what would it look like for you to focus less on the use case and the P&L impact, and focus more on how do you build the repeatable capability, the repeatable pattern of how does your team view opportunities and challenges, and how are you leveraging Gen AI capabilities? Because, like, I've not met a leader, a middle manager in an organization that didn't have more work than their team could actually reasonably do.
No question.
It's a pervasive pattern. And so how do you build the capability in your team to create that flywheel, to create that repeatable pattern, and rather than acquiesce to, like, possibly what your organizational system and your organizational culture might really value, those hard cost savings, but how can you reorient it to, my team is doing more higher value work because of the lower value activities that we've automated. So if I'm in a middle management role, that's what I would hope for those of you in that role, is that you're able to hopefully work within your current organizational system and constraints to create that kind of a focus. One of my quotes is always, know what game you're playing. And so if there's a hardcore push towards that hard dollar savings of needing to move people out of your team, and like, let's face it, like it's a really prevalent pattern these days where there's a strong push to reduce expenses and reduce employee expenses. But my hope would be that we can influence that improved value delivery by building that capability.
Yeah, that push to reduce headcount and to do more with less, that's been around for a while. That's not going anywhere. I see it being used and maybe even potentially weaponized more with AI.
Mm-hmm.
AI is an easy scapegoat to say, all right, we're going to eliminate these jobs because we've got AI doing these lower level functions and we've automated workflows with agents, et cetera. There's truth in that, but that's a conscious choice that leaders can make as well. I do want to go back to the focus on the middle managers, the mid-level leaders, because they're traditionally in a very tough spot when it comes to bringing about change in an organization. And I get your point on talking about the dollar value and EBITDA and all of that. But one of the things that struck me as you were talking is, I think now more than ever, middle level managers and leaders need to broaden their cohort. Instead of kind of staying in your hierarchical lane, which is common, I think now, if I'm a middle manager in a large organization, I need to strengthen my peer team. I need to strengthen my cohort. I need to be aligned and shoulder to shoulder with somebody from finance and accounting to help me think through those financial implications of what I'm doing. I see this more than ever being a call to action to improve our AI literacy in organizations. Because whether you're an engineering manager or a HR manager or a functional manager, whatever your manager or director role is, right? Improving your AI literacy, helping make sure that the people below you are improving their literacy. And because there are multiple dimensions to learning about AI, there's obviously the technical conceptual side, there's the practical side. Again, I am not an engineer, but I'm continuing to sharpen my power user skills and how I use these tools and how I understand these tools. And so I think when it comes to generative AI, that middle level leader needs to build a cohort. They need to build a stronger peer-based team that is looking at this in a more holistic way, to your point, so that we're all collectively optimizing the system for what we need to be, rather than taking a fear-based approach to it, or putting my head in the sand, thinking, well, if I just ignore this, it'll go away, or it'll be somebody else's problem. And I think that's organizations. I'm sensing that organizations, again, that are experimenting with AI, but not seeing any real value out of it, in part is because they don't have a clear strategy around how are we going to improve our talent, whether it's hiring people with these skills, which is a bit of a interesting juxtaposition against, well, we need to reduce our headcount. Oh, but we need to go hire these new skills. Or are we building that internal capability with our existing workforce? Most professionals have the capability to learn new things and to maybe shift their expertise. So I see talent and upskilling as a major gap with organizations, and not really understanding the various dimensions of literacy that's needed around AI. Because again, it's not just getting the technical skills. You have to have the practical skills on how to use these tools. Obviously, there are the ethical implications of, what are we doing? And I think a lot of the perception on the ethical side of it is that it's kind of that kind of like the old QA testing, right? We're going to spend all this time coding or building a product, and we'll test it when we think it's done.
Yeah.
And I think ethics, you can't treat it that way. You can't try to put a control gate at the end. You need to build it into your strategy. You need to build it into your learning. And it can be overwhelming for organizations, but if they're able to kind of really look at each of those dimensions and have clarity on, this is what our capabilities are today, this is what we need to be doing to optimize the system and build competitive advantage, et cetera, then we have a clearer path to take these so-called experiments, these pilots, and actually turn them into real value.
Yeah. Something you said really prompted a bit of a new thought for me, or maybe it's an old thought. Looking at it through at a new angle. We certainly seen the dynamic where functional leaders tend to focus on, how do I optimize within my area? And like, we come in and we work with organizations, and like, we see it so quickly as outsiders, right? It's like, at the umbrella level, you are leaving so much improvement opportunity on the table because of all the focus, within a given functional silo. But what you said about the cohort hit me in terms of an unlock to really look at. I mean, it really is sort of a work stream, value stream optimization kind of a play. But if we have a cross-functional cohort, we can start to look more at the interfaces and, like, how does my function interface with your function, and where do we have latency, lag, what is contributing to delays in how we're taking any given thing that we're working on and accelerating the flow of it through our system. So I love that notion of, don't just focus inwardly, but focus on building that leader cohort, as you said, or your peer cohort, of how can we work together to, maybe it's just two functions, maybe it's more, but looking at where do you have, looking at all these meetings that tend to clog up your calendar too, right? It's, where do you have middle managers who are, they show up every week, they look at their calendar and they're like, well, like, starting off, I've got these 12 hours worth of meetings. And it's like, all those 12 hours worth of meetings is coordination among other functions. Well, like, what information is being exchanged in those meetings? What decisions are being made? Figuring out among that group, how can you kill some of these ongoing meetings? Like, what can AI do to help you either kill meetings, or, maybe take a standing 1 hour meeting and turn it into a bi-weekly meeting, or turn it into a 15-minute meeting, or, like, there's all kinds of opportunities from that perspective. So, I then kind of reflect back on, what is it about the organizational culture that either promotes that kind of behavior, or, sadly, in all too many cases, might disincent that kind of behavior. And how can we break through that? I don't know. What are some of the things you've seen culturally that either support or detract from, those peer groups of leaders being able to kind of form that cohort and be more collaborative and collectively improving their system versus just focusing within their silo?
Yeah. So I think this is a pattern and a challenge that virtually every organization that I've ever worked with has to struggle with, of more demand than capacity. And I think that is a root cause. It's not the only cause, but a root cause to that cultural or behavioral pattern of, I've got all these meetings. I spend, how many managers and leaders have you and I talked to over the years that when we start consulting, advising, coaching them, that's one of their first pushbacks of, I've got all these meetings. I never have time to even think straight because I'm just going from meeting to meeting. And I think that gets bred out of a certain cultural norm of, being busy is somehow a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And I think what's really obvious to me, and this is partly just based on common sense and just based on my experience over the last couple of years, as I've rolled up my sleeves and started digging into learning more about AI and learning the various LLMs and other tools, is that we can actually leverage generative AI tools, whether you're talking about something like a Copilot or ChatGPT or some other tool. You can use Gen AI to help you solve the problem that how it's creating friction or tension within your organization and within those norms. So yes, could we apply some very basic tools to help us be more efficient in terms of how we schedule our time or how we organize our calendar? Absolutely. Can we use note-taking tools to help, expedite getting the information we need out of these meetings? I think we also, going back to my point of thinking about building more of a cohort of peers, is how can we leverage generative AI tools to help us solve the question or the quandary of how do we build our AI literacy more effectively?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that I need to learn based on my role, based on my expertise, based on where I sit in the hierarchy versus the things that you might need to be learning and applying in your part of the organization? And so this is something that clicked for me several months ago, but certainly I have to remind myself of on a weekly basis as I'm grappling with my own challenges and thinking through. It is now second nature to me to go, well, I'm just going to sit down with ChatGPT or Gemini, or I typically use both, and to help me think this through. And so I'm using Gen AI tools to help me think about how I need to better use Gen AI tools. So it's this interesting loop of we can use these tools to help us better understand them and build then our understanding of how do we inject this into our strategy? How do we build our literacy? How do we make sure that we're optimizing for the right thing? So it's a kind of a self-solving loop there, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. The one pattern that jumped to mind for me is we see this all too often, and it's sort of it's a corollary to the when there's danger, put your own oxygen mask on first. But going back to the middle manager concept, is middle managers are, in my experience, often in a very unenviable position in the organization. They rarely have the time to do the things that they value most, and also that are the things that likely ultimately create the greatest impact for the organization. Things like mentoring, coaching, developing the people on their team. More often than not, in my experience, working with the middle management layer and sort of taking a poll on like, where are you spending time? Where would you like to spend more time? That's one of the areas that leaders, I would say it's pretty close to never have I seen a group of middle managers say, well, actually I need to spend less time developing my team. That's always one of the top things that they want to have more time for. And so how do you leverage AI to take a look at the things that are happening in your, both in your organization and how you interface with your peers to create a shift in where your time is being spent? And I think there's probably a lot of middle managers that are in that, catch 22 of, if I only had enough time to learn what I could do with Gen AI to save myself time, but I don't have the time to do that, so I just keep doing what I've been doing. And it's like,
Right.
at some point, there's going to have to be some strategic trade-off of like, you're just going to have to hit the pause button, or maybe just go enroll in a program, or take a couple of days or a week and figure out, like, how do I fundamentally change how I'm approaching my job, and how am I leveraging Gen AI to better support where I'm spending my time. I think that's critical. From, we're kind of taking the ROI conversation from the organizational level now to like the individual leader. And I do think it's fair to call out and focus in on that middle manager role, because like that's probably the hardest job in the company.
Yeah, it is one of the harder spots to be in. But so I was going to segue us back into the topic, right? So how do we escape AI pilot purgatory? And I do think, if we talk about kind of that middle tier of leadership, they have more impact on the systems than they think often. And, so the job of senior leadership doesn't change. You're responsible for setting the strategy and for enabling the organization to execute against that strategy. And you're also responsible for modeling what you want or expect out of your culture, right? You're not going to change your culture, by hitting a button that says change, but you will model that. So the role for leadership is the same, right? You've got strategic expectations. You've got to make sure you're enabling folks. The role of the individual contributor is definitely changing, right? And how are they using AI tools? What are they learning? How is it helping them solve problems? How is it helping them do the task at hand? But I do think the leadership in the middle has the opportunity to really make sure that the systems are functioning, that the systems are evolving and adapting. And I think they're the key. They're the key that says, all right, instead of us just doing a bunch of pilots here and there, how can we coalesce that? How can we bring that together? And I think one of the things that group needs to be doing is, again, stop thinking of yourself as, I'm just one person in my silo and I have to just focus on my silo, to how do I become part of that connective tissue? How do I build those relationships? Again, whether it's across to finance and accounting, or I go talk to one of my peers in manufacturing, whatever that may be. I think now more than ever, if I'm in that role, I need to be building my peer team, my cohort, as I like to call it. And in doing that, I also need to be vulnerable and transparent about my own AI literacy or lack thereof, and how can I find ways to start to up-level myself while I'm also taking care of the people that report to me. So I do think that middle layer is a critical element to being able to escape that pilot purgatory and start to see the system operating in a way that then at least gives us, if not direct results, but at least good clues that we're on the right track for ROI.
Love it. Well, the only thought I have right now is we've been working really hard to come up with some ways to support folks when they're facing, any number of these challenges that we've talked about. So I would encourage folks, go to our website, optimizingforimpact.com. Richard's got the QR code for our Accelerating AI workshop to just help you navigate your organizational system and identify what are some of the ways that you can create some unlocks and create greater impacts with AI. And also on our website under the workshops tab, we've got some other offerings there as well that we would encourage you to check out, depending on where you are in your journey. That's what we're here for. That's what we're passionate about, is helping people to improve the system that they're working in.
That's right. And, my final point will be just my own internal mantra is keep learning, keep digging into it. If you're already an expert, then share your knowledge with others. If you're a novice or you're just experimenting, keep sharing that knowledge as well. So the more we lean in and the more we learn, the more we share, then our chances of optimizing for the right things is definitely going to be in our favor. Well, thanks, Randy. As always, I enjoyed the conversation. And if you're watching this video, please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to just have a chat about this topic.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.